Hi everyone. Here is the presentation of my topic of medical law. My topic is study of the legalization of euthanasia in the Chinese legal system. My name is Chen Siqi. I am from Faculty of Law, University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. Here's my contents, including 7 parts. Part 1 Introduction. Part 2 The concept of euthanasia. Part 3 Basics for the legalization of euthanasia. Part 4 Obstacles to legalizing euthanasia. Part 5 Euthanasia legislation in different countries of the world. Part 6 Recommendations for legalization euthanasia in China. Part 7 Conclusion. Part 1 Introduction. Euthanasia has been recognized by law in some countries such as Netherlands, Belgium, but there is no relevant legislation in China that clearly stipulates the euthanasia system. In order to better establish the euthanasia system and prevent abuse, this article will analyze the euthanasia legislation in other countries, explore how to legalize euthanasia in China. Part 2 The concept of euthanasia. Most scholars argue that its earliest origin is the Greek word euthanasia, which means death without pain, death with pleasure, or death with dignity. A patient suffering from an incurable disease is suffering from physical pain and is also extremely distressed at mental level. Under the voluntary and repeated request of the patient, with the approval of medical institutions, regulatory agencies and their families, the death of the technical nature of survival assistance, passive euthanasia, or in a humanly manner such as with prescription drugs or by relatively peaceful means to end the patient's life. Active euthanasia. Part 3 Basis for the legalization of euthanasia. Why support the legalization of euthanasia? We can analyze it from 3 aspects. 1. Ethical basics. 2. Legal basics. 3. Social significance. For ethical basics, the purpose of euthanasia is to shorten the duration of suffering, further standardize the process of death, and achieve a peaceful death. Euthanasia is in line with the values of human life. Euthanasia is to respect life, to free the dying and suffering patients from pain. And it reflects the value of life. Life and death are beautiful. Euthanasia embodies the right of citizens to choose their own lives. Human dignity gives people the right to choose, and that choice includes life and death. Euthanasia is in line with the goals of modern medicine. Euthanasia helps the dying patients get rid of extreme pain and torture, and ends their meaningless lives, which is in line with the goal of modern medicine to a certain extent. For legal basis, the legal basis for the implementation of euthanasia lies in the exercise of people's right to freedom. People have the freedom to decide how to deal with their right to life. There is no legal prohibition, nor will it interfere with normal moral norms and the normal social order. Euthanasia is to follow one's will to accelerate the realization of death, and to enable him to die with dignity, to increase the overall well-being of society and the sense of identity of the individual. For social significance, with the rapid development of the economy and society, people's pursuit of life value is not only reflected in the requirements for life, but also in the pursuit of the quality of death, which is the opposite of life. The implementation of euthanasia can improve the public's satisfaction with the quality of life and optimize the quality of life. The overall quality of the life process. The social value of euthanasia, on the one hand, can alleviate the problem of shortage of medical resource allocation. On the other hand, it can also reduce the input cost of social medical care. Part 4. Obstacles of legalization. Legalizing euthanasia. There is usually a clear resistance to euthanasia due to weak public awareness of euthanasia, especially in rural areas due to fear of death, and the relative lack of awareness of euthanasia. The reason is in their inherent concept, death is unlucky and should not be mentioned lightly. This is also an objective obstacle to the popularization of the concept of euthanasia. The legalization of euthanasia will, to some extent, put patients and vulnerable groups in society under the pressure of must apply for euthanasia, forming an unfavorable situation such as the evolution from the right to die to the obligation to die. And it may be used by murderers. The patient's family may make an agreement with the doctor to deliberately murder the vulnerable patient. At this time, euthanasia provides institutional guarantee for excused killing. Conflict with social ethics. Traditional medical theory holds that life should be kept as long as possible. So, for those who oppose euthanasia is murder. 5. Euthanasia legislation in different countries. For Netherlands, the often the euthanasia, or we can call it the euthanasia law, was enacted in 2001. And for Belgium, the Belgian Act on Euthanasia promulgated in 2002 and amended in 2005 and named in 2014. The United States, California passed the Natural Death Act in 1976, and Oregon Death with Dignity Act of 1994, and this act only passed in Washington, Vermont, and Montana, and then Advanced Directives Act of 1999 for Texas, and California End of Life Option Act of 2015, and then Medical Aid in Dying for the Terminally 3 Act of 2019 for New Jersey. And for Japan, in April 1950, the judgment of the Tokyo District Court and the judgment of the Nagoya High Court in December 1962 formed the case law of euthanasia in Japan, but there is not a written law or regulation or legislation acts on euthanasia in Japan so far. At the first International Euthanasia Conference held in Tokyo in 1976, representatives of Australia, Japan, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States signed the Tokyo Declaration, declaring that the right to die with dignity should be respected. In 1980, Japan established the International Federation for the Right to Die to fight for the right to euthanasia, and passed 6 recommendations for legalizing euthanasia in China. 1. Euthanasia should only be reserved for patients suffering from a terminal illness in the moribund state. 2. Euthanasia must be based on the patient's true wishes, so it is difficult for minors and psychiatric patients to meet the requirements. 3. The executor of euthanasia should be a medical expert with extensive clinical experience and professional diagnosis of the patient's health status, and is required to be familiar with the patient's health status. 4. Establish an euthanasia supervision committee to review and supervise the euthanasia process to ensure that all aspects of euthanasia, such as the object, the executor, and the surgical method, meet the requirements. 5. Through publicity and education, people can correctly understand the meaning of euthanasia and eliminate misunderstanding and prejudice of euthanasia. Part 7. Conclusion. Since the establishment of the euthanasia system, how to apply it in China and realize the legalization of euthanasia in China has become the focus of attention in the field of Chinese theoretical law. This article starts from the concept and the characteristics of euthanasia and starts with the obstacles faced by the legalization of euthanasia in China. Through the investigation of the legislation of euthanasia system in other countries, it puts forward suggestions on how to legalize euthanasia in China. At present, there are differences in the concept of euthanasia in China, and there is considerable controversy over the legalization of euthanasia. Only by acknowledging the legalization of euthanasia can it be standardized and strict procedures established for it. Today, with the rapid development of politics, economy, society, culture, and science and technology, the institutional model that emerges should also conform to the trend of the times. The legalization of euthanasia has ethical, legal, and social basics and meets the needs of the current public. However, the legalization of euthanasia is not only a legal issue but also involves many fields such as morality, ethics, society, medicine, and so on. The research on the legalization of euthanasia still has a long way to go. Thanks.